have you here with us this evening or whatever time it is in your time zone. I'd like to introduce Erika, who is our test prep expert at Magoosh, and she is going to take it away to talk about how to set an ACT and SAT score goal.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for your patience as we figure out the tech on this one. And thanks for being here. Like Jessica says, we're going to talk about how to set an SAT, ACT score goal today. And kind of the side note or sub bullet or subtitle here is why pushing for a perfect score is an imperfect plan. Because this is something that I see a lot from students and that I really personally care about and think can help you and your students. So really quickly, hi, I'm Erika. I'm the SAT ACT Senior Curriculum Manager here at Magoosh. So what that means is that any of our content or curriculum, so our lessons, our questions, our explanations, our live classes curriculum, all of that is something that I work on, and I look at the strategy, I look at the implementation, I look at how do we present these things, in what order do we present these things, what's going to be the best way to teach this, what's going to be the strategy that's going to resonate with the most students, which strategy should we put first, is this going to be best communicated in video and writing, et cetera, et cetera. So that's me. I'm currently working predominantly on expanding our live classes offerings. So we are doing, in addition to our online program, we have live classes, which are kind of new to us as of this year, that basically cover 95% of the stuff on a given exam, and kind of go through what's going to be most important, what's going to be most foundational, what builds on what, and teach students to have the confidence to handle those sorts of topics on their own. So that's what I'm currently working on. I have 99th percentile scores on the SAT and ACT from back in the day. The SAT was slightly different back then. So those scores probably don't make a lot of sense at this point, but they are 99th percentile. I also have 99th percentile scores on some other exams because I have taught and written materials for more than 10 different standardized tests over the years. So test prep is a really big part of my life. The SAT and the ACT are where I started, where I keep coming back to. So they have a special place in my heart. Now, before we kind of jump into our goals and into our discussion for today, I want to just quickly plug the fact that we are having a sale right now in June, and it is 20% off of any ACT or SAT plan. So that's our online program as well as our live classes, which is a really awesome deal. We don't normally do this kind of a discount, especially for live offerings. So this is a really, really awesome sale. And it is available through midnight Pacific time today. So this is the tail end of the sale. It's almost over. So I do really recommend, if you are interested, to jump on it and give it a try. All right. And you can just find that on our plans page, either for act.magoosh.com or sat.magoosh.com. So there's no specific code. It's just available on the website through midnight. Okay, so goals for today. We have a lot of them. We are going to discuss why setting a score goal is important, why you should do it at all. We're going to learn why a perfect score is not a good goal. So why your goal should be personal to you. We're going to discover how to set the right score goal for you or your student. We're going to find out how to build a study timeline based on your score goal. So how do you actually meet that goal? And then we're going to talk through reassessing your goals if you find that your timeline and your goals do not match up. All right, so starting from the top, why set a score goal? And the reason that I bring this up is because when I ask students, what are your goals? Or when I have asked students, what are your goals? When I've been tutoring or teaching classes, probably the most common response that I get is, I want to do the best that I can, which is great, right? That's awesome. And that's a good goal if you are willing to reevaluate your school list. So if you want to do the best you can, and then once you get your score, then decide what schools you're going to apply to, totally works. However, for most students, There are schools that you want to apply to. There are schools that you want to be admitted to. There are certain goals that you already have for your admissions and college experience. So if you don't set a score goal that aligns with that, you're not necessarily going to be in the best shape to achieve those goals. So why set a score goal? One, it's going to show you how much improvement is needed. So oftentimes folks will, say, I'm going to do my best, right? And they don't really know how much work they need to do in order to do their best. And oftentimes doing their best means they're going to study for like a week and then take the test and then great, that's their best. But that's probably not actually their best, right? Probably their best is something that would take multiple months, right? So setting a score goal is going to show you or your student how much improvement you still need. So based on a full-length practice test, going, okay, here's where I am, here's where I want to be in order to get into the schools that I'm targeting, right? Then we can go, okay, this is how much I need to do. This is then, okay, how much study do I need to do? So it then allows us to build a study timeline that's actually gonna work, right? So instead of going, okay, do my best, let's call it 3 weeks. Now we actually have a pretty clear vision. We go, okay, these are how many points I need to improve. Is it realistic for me to accomplish that in 3 weeks? Okay, maybe not. Maybe this upcoming test date is not the one for me. Maybe I should plan for a different one, right? So it basically sets us up for success. If we don't have a goal, we're not going to meet that goal because we don't have it, right? So we could get lucky and it could all just totally work out, but setting that goal is going to help us just have a clear vision of what we need to attain and then what we need to do in order to attain it. And then that leads me to my third point, which is it ensures that you've thought about what's needed for admission at your desired schools. So if you do have schools that you are looking to go to, you are targeting certain programs, having a score goal that is catered specifically to those schools, to those programs, is going to ensure, again, that what you're aiming for makes sense for you, right? That you're not aiming for too high of a score for no reason or too low of a score for no reason, that your goal aligns with your long-term goals and then that your plan aligns with your short-term goals. Right? So it's just all about planning. All right. So why set a score goal? Because then it allows you to plan. All right. Now, so we've decided that we're going to set a score goal. We're not just going to say, I'm going to do my absolute best. Why not aim for a perfect score, right? So my goal is a 1600 SAT or a 36 ACT. I want to knock it out of the park, right? Because if I set the best possible goal, then I'm going to get as close to that as I can. So it's just another version of do my best. Okay, so maybe we can see why that's not a super helpful goal, but let's dig into this a little bit more. Number one, it doesn't set you up for success. And why is that? Well, one, it's rarely attainable, right? A perfect score is something that is achieved by very, very few students, like decimal percents of students who take these tests. And even in the students who are performing at that level, students who are in the top 1 percentile, the top 0.5 percentile, the top 0.2 percentile, those students, even for them, a perfect score is rarely attainable because not every test is the same. And if you're, again, aiming for a perfect score, if you're taking a test on a date where the curve is different, right? Maybe students are performing particularly well, or it's kind of an easier test. Missing a single question can knock down your percentile, can knock down your score pretty significantly. I've seen students who are top performers, really, really great, consistently performing in the 99th percentile on test day, miss a question and it knocks them down a little bit. Still an awesome score, but it's not going to be perfect, right? So even a perfect score is not, even for top performers, a perfect score is not going to be a great goal because, again, it's not going to be consistently attainable for pretty much anybody, right? So part two of that, not only is it a goal that you're going to fail to meet in all likelihood, which is not particularly encouraging, it's not going to be a particularly attainable goal, Two, it likely isn't required for your desired schools. And actually, when I say likely, I mean it isn't required for your desired schools. There are no schools that are going to require you to have a perfect score, which actually kind of leads me to this second point, which is that even top schools don't really care about the difference between the highest percentiles on this test, right? A 98th percentile and a 99th percentile really just doesn't mean anything. A lower 99th percentile versus an upper 99th percentile, they don't care. That stuff doesn't matter because it's not going to influence their performance at the school. The things that are going to matter a lot more are the other things in the application, right? So things like essays, things like GPA, things like course rigor, things like letters of recommendation are going to matter so much more than a percentile or a portion of a percentile. So perfect score, not a great goal for top schools, but it's also not a great goal, even more not a great goal for schools that are not at the very, very, very tippy top of the US World News and World Report list, right? If your schools are not going to require a top score, don't aim for it. There's no reason to put the added burden on yourself of an unattainable score goal, of a score goal that's not going to be particularly helpful in planning, when setting a more attainable, more realistic, more helpful goal is something that you could do instead. So perfect score, not a great goal. You should set a goal that's personal to you and to your schools. Which leads me to our next slide, which is how do we actually set a score goal? So we've decided, okay, I'm setting a goal. It's not going to be a perfect score. It is going to be my goal. Well, how do I do that? The first thing is to come up with your list of desired schools. So like I said, it's the goal of getting a score is to get into a school, a specific school, right? So if we don't know what schools we're applying to, it's not going to make it easy to set a score goal because again, those scores are going to be totally dependent on where we want to go. Now, if you don't have a clear view of where you want to go, okay, then maybe the move of doing your best and then figuring it out later, that's okay. But that's going to just probably leave you with slightly fewer options than coming in with a plan. So come up with your list of desired schools. Now, when you come up with a list of desired schools, make sure that you do a balance between safety schools, target schools, and reach schools. So what does that mean? Well, kind of the definition of these are safety schools are schools that we would consider that we've got like a pretty solid chance of getting in. Like it's a pretty safe bet. We would be very surprised if we didn't get into that school. A target school is one where we feel like we have like a 50% chance of getting in, like pretty likely, but like not entirely sure. I'm right about the average for the students who go to these schools. And then a reach school is going to be one where it's going, okay, the average student is someone who's probably going to perform better in terms of their test than I am, maybe are going to have higher course rigor, something that's just going to be a reach, right? Now it's going to be maybe a little bit challenging and maybe a little bit more intuitive to come up with this list without your test score, right? Without a test score, it's going to be hard to say, am I an average student, an above average student, a below average student, am I 25th, 50th, or 75th percentile? But these are the sorts of things that maybe you could judge against, okay, where is my score at now? What am I seeing about course rigor? What am I seeing about GPA? It might be a little bit more intuitive, but the big idea here is that we don't want to have all reach schools. That's not going to be helpful for us. That could result in not getting into school at all. Not awesome. We want to make sure that it's pretty balanced. If you're going to have more of any of them, aim for target schools, schools where you're going, this is like the sort of school that I am 50% chance of getting into. Okay, so you come up with your list of schools. Now this can always get tweaked a little bit later, but we want it to be pretty solid. Then we're going to research each of those schools. Now, depending on you, this might be a shorter list, might be, 3 or 4 schools, it might be a larger list, like 9, 10 schools. Once we're getting into the double digits, I advise maybe not doing that just in terms of balancing your life, but it might be a longer or a shorter list. For each of those schools, you're going to research 25th, 50th, and 75th percentile scores for admitted students. And again, make it specific to your test, ACT or SAT. So you're going to be able to just Google and go, okay, school name, SAT score or ACT score, average. And if you search that, you're very likely to find the information that you want. This is typically available from US News and World Report or on various test prep blogs. I know that we have information like this on our blog. So go ahead and do that research. Make sure that it's current, up to date, and for admitted students. So take all of that information, write it down, make sure that you have it. Now, once you have this information, I recommend taking the average of the 75th percentile scores. And that is going to be a really, really solid score goal for you. Now, you might be going, why 75th percentile? Why not average? The reason for this is that ideally we want to get into these schools. And if we're aiming for the 50th percentile, we've got like a 1 in 2 chance of getting into our target schools, which is, you know, if we've got enough of them, all right, our chances are pretty solid. However, it also means that we're running that risk of not getting in, right? So that can be a little bit dangerous. So we want to aim a little bit higher. We want to be particularly strong candidates just to make it more likely that we are going to college in the fall. All right, so we go, okay, average of 75th percentile scores for admitted students for all of those schools is going to be your score goal. Now, to do a quick check on this, just in case like the spread of your schools is pretty extreme or you have kind of a strange distribution in there, if you take a look at that score, it should ideally be equal to the 50th percentile or the average score for all of your safety and target schools. So that means that you have more than a 1 in 2 chance, or at least a 1 in 2 chance for all safety and all target. Frankly, it should be much higher than 50th percentile for safety. In order for it to be a true safety, it should be like 75th percentile and higher for sure for safety. But that's just a good check to make sure that those are actually safety or target schools. If that's not the case, maybe those are not safety or target schools. And then for your reach schools, you're going to want to make sure that that goal is at least going to be the 25th percentile for those ones. Now, if it's below the 25th percentile, that's like a really reach school. So that's going to be, you have a much lower chance of getting in. You could get in, absolutely, those things happen, but you're not going to have a great shot. And so it may not be a good use of time. So those are just some quick checks to make sure that that target score, that goal score is actually going to work, and that your designations of safety, target, and reach are actually realistic to what you're aiming for. Okay, so there we have it. There's our score goal. So that's the number that we're going to be shooting for. What do we do with that? Okay, that leads us to the idea of building a study timeline. So now that we know what we're aiming for, okay, one, motivating, great. We've got this thing that we're working toward, but how do we work toward it? First thing that we're going to do, if we haven't already done it, and if you've been to any of my other webinars, you've heard this before, but I'm going to say it again, take a realistic full-length practice test. This is the best thing that you can do to start your study because it tells you where you're starting. It gives you a baseline. It says, okay, if I took the test tomorrow, here's what I'm going to score. So really important that we take it realistically, all in one sitting, whole test, do an official one if you can. There's tons of them out there. Make it realistic because we want to know, okay, accurate baseline. So now that we've got our baseline score, what we would score if we took the test tomorrow, now we're going to subtract that from our goal score. And that's going to tell us our desired point improvement. So what is the work that we need to accomplish on our score in order to meet that goal? So once we have that number, now we can start thinking about, well, how long is that number going to take? Now, based on about 10 hours of study per week, we have some guidelines. Now, these are guidelines. They are going to depend a little bit on your student. For instance, if your student is starting at a lower score, this might go a little faster, right? If they know nothing about the test, okay, that's likely some initial points that are just going to come a little bit faster as we learn how it's timed and how it's structured. If your student is maybe further in, knows a little bit more about the test, maybe taken it before. Okay, this timeline might actually be over aggressive. We might need longer to accomplish these improvements. If we're studying less than 10 hours per week, it's probably going to take longer. If we're studying a little bit more than 10 hours per week, don't study too much more, but potentially an extra 5 hours per week could help. Is the quality of our study good? All sorts of things can impact whether or not this is accurate. So these are estimates, but they're useful estimates. So based on about 10 hours of study per week, here's what we're looking at. So on ACT, if we are looking at a score improvement of 3 points, we are probably looking at a 1 to 2 month timeline. Now, if you're looking at a score improvement of less than 3 points, that's great. I would still probably shoot for 1 to 2 months, just so that we have the time to build up those skills, make sure that we're solid. But if we're aiming for 3 points, I would aim maybe for the farther end, maybe 2 months, unless you're very, very, very new to the test and you're pretty confident that just learning a little bit will be enough. So about 3 points, we're looking at 1 to 2 months. Okay, what if we're looking for a little bit more? What if we're looking at like 5 to 6 points? Okay, so that's a more significant score improvement. That's maybe going to take more like 3 to 4 months, again, with about 10 hours of study per week. So this is looking at a pretty significant commitment. That's looking at maybe a whole summer of study. If you're looking at an improvement of 7 to 10 points, that's really sizable, which is awesome. That's great. That's a noble and very cool goal, and it's attainable. I've seen it done, but it usually takes a while. That's the sort of study that's going to take place over 6 to 12 months. So that's the sort of thing where if we are a sophomore, okay, great to know, because we're going to want to work on this until we're in our junior year and ready to take that test. All right. For SAT, we have kind of a similar breakdown, but obviously the points are different. So on SAT, if we're looking at a 70 to 150 point improvement, we're looking at about 1 to 2 months. All right. If we're looking at less than 70 points, potentially we could do it in less time, but I would still give yourself a similar time frame. If we're looking at a larger improvement, 150 to 250, we're looking at 3 to 4 months. That's more of that. Okay, we're going to do it over like a summer or over a whole quarter, but that is going to be a pretty concerted effort. If we're looking at 250 to 350 points, that is a really big improvement. Again, awesome, but you're going to want to dedicate time to it at about 10 hours of study per week. Consistently, we're looking at probably 6 to 12 months of study. All right, so once we have our desired score improvement, we can go, okay, looking at these estimates, I can figure out, okay, about when should my test date be? All right. Now, we could take a test before that, but we're definitely not going to want to have that be our last. We should definitely make sure that we have at least this amount of time before our final testing. So maybe we're looking at that and we're going, that doesn't work for me, right? Maybe I'm looking for one of those larger score improvements, but I don't have that kind of time. Maybe I'm a junior, maybe I'm a senior, and I need to test within a couple of months or within a few months. I just don't have the time to commit to something larger. Or maybe we're going, okay, I could have taken a later test, but I'm already signed up. What do I do? We have 2 options here. Option number 1 is to adjust our timeline. So that's if we have the flexibility. If we're going, okay, I was signed up for a test in a month, but I'm learning that a month is probably not going to be realistic for what I'm trying to achieve here. Okay, so maybe I'm going to go, all right, maybe I will take the test in a month and use that as a learning experience, but I'm going to schedule a retake now further down the line with a time period that realistically reflects the sort of improvement that I want to make. So we can adjust our timeline. Now, if we don't want to adjust our timeline or we can't adjust our timeline, we need to take that test, we're going to want to adjust our score goal. And the thing here is that it's just realism and it's motivation. And you might be kind of going, well, why not aim for the biggest and best and the absolute greatest that we can do? One, because it's pretty discouraging to have goals that just aren't attainable. And 2, because we want to make sure that we are catering the rest of our application to the specific schools that we're looking at going to. So the sooner that we can kind of make the judgment call of, okay, something here is not aligned, I am not aiming for the sorts of schools that are going to be right for me and the sorts of things that I'm trying to achieve, the sooner we can make that change, just the easier it's going to be mentally and emotionally, but also in terms of making sure that we're actually preparing the stuff that we need for those schools, for those programs. So we can adjust our timeline, we can adjust our score goal. So part of adjusting our score goal means reevaluating our desired school list. So part of that is just going to be the reverse of the process we were doing earlier. So rather than going, okay, let me come up with my school list and then let me use the 75th percentiles to come up with my goal score, here we're going to be going, okay, what can I actually achieve in this timeline, right? So we're going to go, okay, here is my timeline. Here's how many points I can expect to improve. What score do I think I can get on test day with that concerted 10 to 15 hours a week of study? Okay, based on that, let me go revisit my school list and some other schools that maybe I was considering and see if I can reassess to go, what is actually going to be a safety school for me? What is actually going to be a target school for me? What is actually going to be a reach school for me? And then create a list where you're going to have an average 75th percentile score that's going to be in line with what you can achieve in that timeline. This can be kind of a bummer of a process, being totally honest. However, it's going to be better long-term because it's going to allow for goals that are achievable and that are going to result in something that you expect. So this is a good thing to do earlier and to do based on real, actual scores and goals. Now, I want to note that I didn't say here that one of our options is to double our study time per week. And that's because that just doesn't do a lot, right? There is a point where quantity of study just kind of caps out. It doesn't become useful. In fact, it can become actively unhelpful. If you're perhaps in the summer, you got nothing else going on, okay, maybe we could study 15 to 20 hours a week, but going beyond that, your study quality is just going to drop off significantly. And probably what you're going to end up doing is doing a lot of drilling. There's not going to be good strategy. You're not going to take a lot from it. So I don't recommend the option of going, nope, my timeline is good, my score goal is good, I just have to study more. That's usually not a good call. However, if you are on the borderline, you're going, okay, I maybe can achieve my goal, but it's like I have the smaller amount of time in the range and the larger point improvement in the range. So it's gonna be tight, right? But I really want to do this, and I really want this to work for me. There is a difference between high quality and low quality study. I mentioned that earlier, and it can totally affect these timelines. If your study is not high quality, there is no guarantee that you will make those score improvements in that amount of time. So one thing that you can do is to really prioritize study quality over study quantity. So making sure that we're not just drilling, that we are doing an error log, that for every mistake we make, we're learning from that mistake. We're trying to never make the same mistake twice. Maybe we're going, I need extra support, right? I'm trying to self-study, but I don't know enough about this test to do that. Or I'm finding it hard to stay motivated. So something like an online program that is written by experts, or a book if you're a paper person, or if you're looking for more personal interaction, or you're looking for that kind of live accountability, something like a class or tutoring might be a good call. Make sure that it is catered to you, right? So something that is going to work for you and that is going to help you get as many points out of that time as possible. So it's not going to massively change those estimates on the previous slide. Don't aim for something that's unattainable. However, if you want to really maximize your chances of that actually happening or getting kind of on the top end of those ranges, making sure that your study is really, really good is going to just maximize your chances there. So if anything's kind of borderline, just make sure that that study is rock solid and get help if you need it. So what are our takeaways? Number one, score goals are important for motivation, making sure that we are looking at what we need, we see what we need to achieve, and we know what that's going to get us, right? Just having that clarity of vision for why we're doing what we're doing can help massively with motivating study, with motivating quality of study. So for motivation, but also for planning purposes, to make sure we actually know how long that we need to study and how much we need to study each week, and whether or not our goals are realistic. When should we schedule our test date, et cetera, et cetera. So motivation and planning, extremely important. Score goals should be based on your personal school list. So your goals should be based on your long-term academic goals. So not a perfect score. There's no reason to shoot for this. No school list is going to result in a score goal that is a perfect score. Study timelines should be realistic to your desired point improvement based on an initial practice test and your score goal. So make sure that when you have that goal, you're not shooting yourself in the foot by not giving yourself enough time and enough effort to achieve it. And then if we're going, hey, those do not align, reevaluate it sooner versus later to avoid future pain, but also to make sure that our study process is as effective as possible. And that's it. That's how to set a score goal. So if you have questions on setting a score goal or making that realistic to your student, or how to self-study or how to study with a program, or if you have questions about Magoosh, now is an excellent time to ask those. So if you want to throw those in the Q&A, I'm happy to answer those. Again, I want to plug the fact that we have a 20% sale on right now. So if maybe you were looking at that and you're going, okay, maybe I am one of those borderline cases, maybe something like an online program or a class might be appropriate for you to help maximize your improvement in your time. So again, that's until midnight Pacific today. All right.
Erica, I saw a question come in just around setting a realistic score goal and what people can realistically expect from a program such as Magoosh. What score improvements are actually realistic. Folks mentioned that they saw the score guarantee, but of course, that may not apply to everybody.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the score guarantee is one that we just guarantee. We just do it. So if you have a Magoosh program, you have that guarantee. So that's something that even if you don't study the way that you should, or it just doesn't work out, that is something that is there as a safety. So that's awesome. But the reason that we have that score guarantee is because those score improvements are realistic. They are things that you can achieve, and they are things that you can achieve with self-study. Again, provided that that self-study is good. So what does good mean? It means 10 hours a week. It means that you are targeting the things that you most need to target. It means that when you are doing lessons and questions, that you're looking at explanations, that you're watching those videos, that if you don't understand something, you're going back and looking at it, that maybe you're taking notes, either in the program or on paper, that you're taking regular practice tests every 2 to 4 weeks. If you are doing those things, then those score improvements that I mentioned on the previous slide, which you can find on our blog as well, if you just look up score improvement timeline, ACT or SAT, Magoosh, you can find that. Those are attainable with self-study if your study quality is high. Now, where we get into trouble is when, okay, maybe I'm struggling with that self-study. Maybe I'm having trouble. Okay, then something like a program with a score guarantee is going to be particularly helpful because it makes sure that you're focused on the right things, that you have an organization to your study. And even further, maybe something that is live that goes, okay, here's what you should be working on. Here is the homework. And here is someone in person to help you with your questions, to help you work through what maybe you weren't understanding from a video, from a written explanation. Just that live interaction can do a lot to answer questions and to improve engagement focus, motivation, all of that good stuff. So are those things achievable? Yes, absolutely. That's why we share that information and why we do have those score goals. But it does really depend on the quality of your study if you are going to commit to using those resources. So if you sign up for a class and then you don't go, maybe you're not going to see that score improvement, or you don't do the homework. But if you do follow, again, that 10 hours a week and follow the guidance in the programs, those are realistic to you. I would, again, like I mentioned earlier, just kind of do a quick, just logical check. If you're earlier in your study, very attainable. Usually those first few points come pretty quick as you get familiar with the test, as you learn more about the different question types. If you're later in your study, it's going to be kind of a harder road to hoe, just because you have already learned those things. And now the sorts of things that you're getting at are going to be maybe more like ingrained habits, things that you have to work harder to adjust. So all of this to say, just signing up for something isn't going to give you a score improvement, but having more guidance to help you use these things more effectively is going to help make those more realistic. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks, Erica. So there's a follow-up question here in the chat. So if there's a miracle of having a 300-point increase by studying really hard the next 2 months, will it be odd to test graders compared to our last test? I know what I need to work on. I'm significantly improving. That's awesome. But I have limited time and I need to make the August SAT the best that I can.
Could you read me that one more time?
Sure. So I am gathering that they are asking about a pretty massive score improvement in a short-ish amount of time.
Oh, okay. I'm actually seeing it now in the chat. Okay, great. Oh, okay. I see what you're talking about. Okay. So I think the question here is, will like test graders or will admissions committees be like, wait, what? And be like really shocked at that sort of improvement over the course of 2 months? No. I mean, if there's any concern of like maybe academic dishonesty, then potentially they might check, and something where it's like a massive improvement in a little bit of time, potentially that's something where they might be like, did this person actually take their test? But again, if it's not something that's like totally out there, like wild, not attainable at all, it's just going to be fine. So different schools look at scores in different ways. Some schools are going to look at your most recent score no matter what. Some schools are going to look at your highest test day. Some schools are going to super score, so look at individual sections. So it's going to depend on the school, how they look at your scores, but they're not going to they're not going to be like, oh, whoa, they used to be not great at this test and now they're good at this test, and we're going to reject them on the basis that before they scored more poorly. Actually, schools love to see improvement. They love that. That's even better than performing right out the gate incredibly. So if you see a score improvement over a couple of tests, schools are going to love that because it means you're going to work hard at those schools. Similarly, if your GPA improves, your course rigor increases, those are the sorts of things that admissions committees absolutely love. So I'm hoping that this is answering your question. I would just maybe go in and do a little bit of honesty with yourself of going like, what do I think I'm actually going to achieve? Do I have backups for my school list? Is it a sort of scenario where like, am I open to taking a gap year if I don't get into any of these schools? Because that's the sort of scenario we potentially run into if we don't see that kind of score improvement in that amount of time and we stick to the same school list. So just make sure that you're being realistic about the process. But in terms of what it means for graders or for admissions committees, unless they're worried about academic dishonesty, it's fine. In fact, it's positive to have a score improvement.
Great. So another question around specific SATs and taking multiple of them. So is the level of difficulty the same across all SATs, regardless of when you take it?
That's such a good question. Kind of, which is not an incredible answer, but that really is the truth. And that they are trying to make it consistent between the test dates. They are doing their absolute darndest. They have specific question types, specific passage types, specific, goals for each test date that is consistent for every single test, right? You are not going to see anything like totally off the wall, especially for SATs. They're really, really very on it. So they try and they test questions in advance. They do their best, right? But different test dates do see different things. Sometimes there's a question that they tested and they thought it was at a certain difficulty level. On test day, surprise, it's not. Or maybe the group of students who happened to take that test date ended up performing better than we thought they would, or worse than we thought they would. And as a result, we end up with kind of like a wacky curve, right? So basically, in order to get the score on your test date, they take the raw number of questions that you got right on the reading section. That then translates through something kind of opaque based on the test date to those scores. Same thing for writing, and then same thing for math as a whole. So no calculator and calculator. They just add up the number of questions you got right, and then something happens to it, and then you get that raw score. So basically, that something that happens has to do with the curve, has to do with how other students performed on that test date. So as a result, different test dates can be different. And that's where we can run into that sort of thing where a student who got a perfect score one test date ends up with like a 1470 the next test date. It happens. It just does. So is the level of difficulty the same? Mostly, but exactly the same. Can we expect the exact same score? Probably not, but it's going to be pretty dang close. Hopefully that answers.
All right, I'm seeing one here. So for a baseline score to set a score goal, could folks use the PSAT for an SAT score goal?
Yes, absolutely. And that's a great question. And yes, the answer is yes. Because the PSAT is specifically designed to be a predictor of the SAT. Now, one thing that the PSAT assumes, basically there's a bunch of different PSATs. There's like the 8-9, there's the 10, and then there's the PSAT that most people take, which is, they kind of consider that the 11, right? And you'll notice that the maximum score there is like a 1520, I think, instead of a 1600. And the reason there is that they're expecting that you're taking the PSAT a little bit earlier than your SAT. And so they're expecting that kind of naturally over the next like 6 months between when they're expecting you're going to take the PSAT and when you're going to take the SAT, that just by nature of being in school and learning and growing and developing, all of that, that you will score the same way. So hopefully that makes sense. You're going to want to look at the raw score on the PSAT. And again, assuming that you've got about like a 6-month difference between PSAT and SAT, that's going to be a pretty solid guess for where you'll be performing on the SAT. That said, if it's been a while since you've taken the PSAT, it's not a bad idea to just take a practice test anyway. Practice tests are awesome. They're such good study. I recommend you take one every 2 to 4 weeks anyway. So unless you like just took the PSAT and you're not ready to take another test yet, I would recommend just taking another SAT practice test. There's a ton of them on the College Board website. Really recommend. So anyway, yes, but they assume a little bit of time and growth between the PSAT and the SAT for that score to be the same. Hope that helps.
Great. Is there a best way to properly practice ACT and SAT questions?
Yeah, great question. So a lot of people assume that the best way to practice all questions is going to be timed. Not true. Practicing timed is something that you should do. Absolutely. Again, practice test every 2 to 4 weeks. So good. But if you do all of your practice timed, that means that you're not going to get the opportunity to kind of build like that strategy, that really solid understanding, to kind of explore the sorts of mistakes that you're making under that time pressure to build that foundation. And as a result, we can end up actually like building bad habits, right? So it's kind of like when you're playing an instrument, you don't start at full speed. Don't do that, right? You're not going to do well, and you're not going to get perfection out of it. So we're going to take our time. We're going to make sure that we're practicing untimed and then work our way up to timed. Now, what is the best way to approach a problem, whether timed or untimed? Error log. And I mentioned this before, but I want to dig into it, which is basically no matter how you approach doing the question, after you do the question, review it. A lot of folks just drill and then they go, cool, I got most of those right. And then they move on. Or they look at the question they missed and they look at the answer and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then they move on. Nope. If you miss the question, dig into it. Spend as much time reviewing your mistakes as you do doing questions. And what that's going to do is it's going to help you figure out, okay, what did I do wrong? Why did I do it wrong? And then how do I recognize that in a future problem and how do I fix it? Now, this is annoying. It takes a really long time. It's kind of a painful process, but it is a way that we are going to get so much more out of our study, like so much more. This is a process that I have seen take students on all sorts of different tests from like totally plateaued, cannot improve, stuck to huge score jump like immediately, because it's the sort of thing that just helps with addressing the sorts of issues, the sorts of things that we're maybe not even seeing that aren't occurring to us. So digging in with an error log is the best way to practice, whether it's an individual untimed question, a set of 5 timed questions, a full-length practice test. Error logging is going to help you get the most out of it. Now, where folks can struggle is where they go like, but I don't know what I did wrong, or I don't know why I did it wrong, or I don't know how to fix it. How do I recognize this again? And that's where something like a program written by experts who can help point out those sorts of things, or a class where you have someone here to help you and to explain those things, who's looked at these questions or written those questions and knows how they work, can really help with figuring out how to take that knowledge to the future. Hopefully that helps. Error logging, we love it. It's the best.
Great, thanks, Erika. So a question, do you have any programs at Magoosh to specifically improve reading scores on the SAT?
Great question. And Jessica, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. I don't believe that we have an option for our online program or our live classes that is reading specific, but there is reading in our online program and in our live classes. It makes up a significant chunk of our online program, and in our live classes, it makes up like 2 lessons, like a lesson and a half. That said, if you are looking for something about reading right now, we did a free live class, or no, that was ACT. This Friday, we are doing a free live class for SAT on our YouTube channel. It will actually be on our YouTube channel on Friday. That's 2 hours that goes over kind of the general stuff about the test in the first hour, but the second hour is about how to approach reading passages, which is one of the most important parts of reading strategy. It's not the whole thing. In our live classes, we have then another 2-hour class about how to approach questions based on the passage, but just that part about the passages can be really, really helpful. We've also got a couple of other videos on our YouTube channel about how to approach the questions. I know that I've got one about the predicting strategy, which is one of the big things that I talk about in that other lesson. So if you're looking for something that's reading specific and you're not interested in any other content, I would recommend checking out our YouTube channel because we've got quite a bit of stuff there. There's also a bunch of stuff on our blog. But if you are interested in like the full experience for reading, I would recommend our online program or our classes. You'll just get other stuff with it that might help you as well.
Cool, thanks, Erika. And I will follow up in the chat with a playlist on YouTube all around reading. So hopefully that will help. Great. What is the best way to grade previous ACT papers when we do it for practice? Can we get the answer keys for practice tests?
Yeah, great question. So most of the official ACT practice tests that I've seen, the answer key is just at the end of the PDF. So if you just scroll to the very end, it has it. And then after the answer key, it's going to have like a way to convert it to an official score. That's always going to be attached there. I've seen with some like SAT tests that it'll have the paper PDF for the practice test, and then there'll be a second PDF for scoring. But for ACT, I'm pretty sure consistently it's all been in one PDF. Now, I can't guarantee that that's the same for other like test prep companies, but if you're looking at official ones, it's all in one. So the ones that I would recommend, there's one on the ACT website that's called, it's like preparing for your ACT or something like that. But if you just Google ACT practice test, it'll be like the first thing that comes up. But there are also a good number of practice tests that are older. I wouldn't recommend going too far back because then the test like changes at a certain point. There's also kind of an intermediate period where like the essay doesn't apply, but the rest of the test is pretty solid, and those are okay. You can find those if you just kind of search online. We might have some of those on our blog as well. I know within our product, we link within the online program that we link to a bunch of those as well. But yeah, I think there's like 6-ish that are like really high quality, awesome ones to practice. Yeah. So unless your timeline is like super long, you probably won't run out.
Great. Thank you, Erika. We can leave just a couple minutes to see if any other questions come through. But I am seeing that, oh, thank you. Thanks for your reply. Thank you for your question. I am not seeing any more in the Q&A window. Well, thank you, everybody.